I received a request to hack the Civilization 6 game. From Leafcutter Overlord, he said, "Can you do a randomized tech tree?" Well, let's see what I can do. Okay, I'm starting a new game. I'm going to click on my tech tree. Wait a second, those don't belong here at the front. I guess I did it. Let's take a look at civics. Yep. If you're interested in learning how to code this, stick around. My name's Devin, and this channel is for coders interested in gaming, hacking, and AI. If you're not familiar with Civilization, let me show you how it normally goes. Starting a new game again, without the hack, putting tech tree. Okay, this is normal. Pottery, husbandry, mining. So let's see how I would code this. The easiest way to search inside of code, I think, is to look at strings, because the code itself is going to get turned into zeros and ones. Strings, which is text, like pottery here, those characters are going to stay intact in the game. So if I search for those, that'll give me a clue. But let me search for the word pottery inside the code. I'm going to open up my task manager, and I'm going to look for the Civilization executable. I'm going to right click and say open file location. That'll tell me where the code is in the game. An executable is all the code turned into zeros and ones. And I can run that through a disassembler, which will turn it back into assembly language, which is a human-like version of the machine code. It's still really hard to read, but it's possible. However, first I'm going to start just searching all of these files, because sometimes there's some configuration files that are helpful where I won't have to actually read the code itself. I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code. You don't have to use this tool, but it's one that I like. It's for coding, but I'm just going to use it for searching. I'm going to tell it I want to search in this folder. And from the game, I'm going to search for pottery. Well, I have some XML files here. And XML files are typically configuration files that are somewhat human readable, but also computer readable. This one says buildings, probably not useful. Resources, probably not either. Technologies, that makes sense. This might be it because it's the tech tree that I'm looking at. Okay, this is really interesting. So pottery right here, it has a type and a name. And this is not really what we see on the screen because this has a weird prefix. So those are more like variable names that must be translated somehow. Okay, but here the cost is interesting. If I go back into the game, pottery has a cost of 16. I'm not sure why the cost doesn't match, so I'll have to investigate that. Era type makes sense. So if I open up here, let me hide this. So on the far left side, it says ancient era. And if I scroll, it says classical era. So pottery is inside the ancient era. So that makes sense. And then UI tree row. UI probably stands for user interface. And we're looking at a tech tree. So row is probably like where it's displayed. Computers usually count by 0. So sailing's probably row 0, astrology row 1. Out of curiosity, let's just see if I modify this XML file. Let's see what happens. So with it being cost 25 in the XML and it being 16 in the UI, let's just double it and see what happens. So let me save. And then I wouldn't expect the game to just automatically update. I'm probably going to have to quit out, and it didn't because it still showed 16. Reopen the game, start a new game, open up the tech tree. Okay, that's a little weird. Pottery shifted to the right, but it did change to 33. So I think it was 16 before, and I doubled it from 25 to 50. Let me open up a calculator. I guess it is basically double. And I think the reason it moved to the right is it must automatically sort based on the cost so that the cheapest things are on the left and the most expensive things are on the right. It is a little weird this dashed line got drawn through it, but I'm given the game data it's not expecting, so it makes sense that it's going to get confused. Okay, so I was able to modify this file. So in theory, I could write a program that opens up this XML file, changes all the data around, saves it, and then I just do that every time before I open the game. But the downside to that is if I permanently modify this XML file, it would be hard for someone to get it back to the original state. So it's probably better if I randomize it on the fly while the game's running. So let's see what else I would have to change in here to get a truly randomized tech tree. I think I would want to pick 2 random technologies, so say pottery and currency, in order to swap them. I could keep the names the same, but I'd want to swap their costs because that's going to make them shift left or right. I would also want to change the era to make sure it moved to the correct section. And if this UI tree row is vertically where it shows, I'd probably want to swap that too. Let's just see if we can swap pottery and currency. So I'm going to undo what I did before, and I'm going to take this 120, put it in pottery, this 25 in currency. They both have the same UI row, so I'll just leave that alone. But currency was under classical, and pottery was under ancient. So let's scroll through the rest of the file to see what else might need to change. Okay, so I have prerequisites here. So if pottery or currency have any prerequisites, I should probably swap those around. And let's see what else. Quotes. I don't think I need to change that because we still want the description and text to be the same. Boosts are how you earn the technology quicker if you accomplish some goal in the game. So I think we want to leave the boosts the same so you earn them the same way. Modifiers. It looks like this is the actual bonus you get when you earn the technology. So I probably don't want to modify those either because we want the technologies themselves to stay the same. We just want them to be earned in a different order. Anywhere a prerequisite is called pottery, I'm going to change it to currency. I guess I'll blink out all the ones that say currency so I have kind of a placeholder because those are the ones I'll need to change to pottery. And then the pottery ones, I will change to currency. So then I need the blank ones and change them to pottery. Here's a blank. Let me save that. Let me quit out the game and reload. And something I forgot to mention is before you start hacking a game, you want to open it up and make sure that it does not have any Valve anti-cheat. So if you get caught cheating, they'll ban you so you can't play online anymore. So I don't see anything that says anti-cheat here, but still, just to be safe, I'm actually hacking the demo. And as an example, let me look up a game I know does have anti-cheat. So if I scroll down here on Counter-Strike, it says Valve anti-cheat enabled. So we didn't see that on Civilization, so we should be safe. Anyways, let's start up a game in Civilization and open up the tech tree. So we tried to change pottery with currency, and it looks like it worked. Currency is now on the left. It shows 16 costs, which is what pottery had. The nice thing is the arrows are drawn correctly now. So maybe the reason that the dashed line was covering up pottery before was because we didn't set up the prerequisites correctly. And then let me scroll and see pottery. Okay, pottery's over here. It has 80. And you can see all the descriptions and icons are still the same. And also the eras. So pottery got put into the classical era. So it looks perfect. So we know we can modify it that way. Let's see how we can modify it in code so that I don't have to modify these XML files every time. So I'm going to hold Control Z just to undo everything I changed. I guess let's search for another word in the code. What's probably happening is this XML file has a list of data points, and something in the code has to be reading each one of these lines one at a time to figure out the data inside of them. And it's not very likely that it'll be in one of these files because XML is a configuration, but the thing that's going to read the XML is probably going to be actual code. So I'm probably going to have to open this up in a disassembler. But just to be safe, I always search these files first, because if I can find them in a regular text file instead of in the actual code, it's going to be much easier for me. We've got an SQL file, which is for databases, create table. Okay, that sounds really promising, because if there's a database that stores all this data, we might be able to modify the database. And the nice thing is database code SQL is like programming code. So we could possibly modify it to randomize, because the problem with the XML is you can't put actual code in there. So I'd need a separate program to randomize this file. And then I also have another configuration file, XML, and then 2 Lua files. So Lua files are also promising because they are a scripting language that a lot of games use for like controlling the AI. So let me just open these Lua files up. Okay, so this Lua file probably won't help me because it says Civilopedia, and I know that is the UI for the encyclopedia. So this is just going to be rendering something on the screen that explains what each technology means. So if I modify this code, it might change how the encyclopedia looks. It might randomize it in the way it's rendered, but that's not necessarily going to change the game rules and logic so that I can actually earn the technologies out of order. So I don't think that's going to help me. Let's try the next Lua. Okay, so this is related to the tech tree, so this could be promising. Tooltip helper pick. Does that mean picture? Art size. So this actually may not be helpful either, because I'm wondering if this is about rendering a tech tree on the screen. So just like the previous one was probably rendering the encyclopedia, this all looks graphical to me. Padding and art. So maybe this is just rendering the tech tree on the screen. And just like I said before, if I modify it just when it's rendered, it may not actually change the logic behind the scenes. So it might be changing it too late in the game. So let's start with the database and see where we go from there. I guess I should explain a little bit about how SQL works. SQL is for relational databases, which means you have a whole bunch of tables, and the tables have relationships between them. So for example, we were looking at technologies before, and also technology prerequisites. So those would be probably two separate tables, and they would point to each other. Okay, so this probably matches the XML really closely. So the prerequisites we're looking at, we have a row with an attribute called technology and an attribute called prereq tech, and it has a string value inside. So if we go back, inside this table, there are two columns with those names. Each of them can store text. So other types of data would be things like integers, which are numbers, Boolean, which is true or false, not null. So null is basically a missing value. So it's not exactly like 0, it's more like the absence of any value at all. So by saying not null, that's a constraint that tells this column to not allow the code to insert a missing value. Primary key, so that's something that uniquely identifies a specific row. So that would prevent the code from accidentally duplicating the technology. So the same technology can't have the same prerequisite multiple times. A lot of times you only have one primary key, but this is called a composite primary key. So there's two different columns combined that create the uniqueness. And it's beneficial to have a unique value in each row, because that's going to be helpful for doing faster lookups in a table. You could also create an index to make lookups faster as well. And then foreign keys is how you create relationships. So it's saying this technology column right here, it references a separate table called technologies. Oh, that's good. I'm going to need that table possibly. And then, because that's how it was in the XML as well, there was this technology section that had a bunch of rows inside of it. So there must be a table called that. And then the technology column here matches the technology type column in the technologies table. So for example, where we've got tech_pottery, that same value would be inside this technology type, tech_pottery. So it would connect those two together if I'm wanting to search for which prerequisites a technology has. That's what the foreign key or the relationship does. And here, there's delete cascade, update cascade, because technology is kind of the main table. So if I were to delete pottery out of the main technology table, it would automatically delete it out of the prerequisites table as well. So I know I've got two tables, technology and prereqs. I wonder if somewhere in here it's inserting the data into those tables from the XML. Let me just scroll through real quick. Okay, so I had a bunch of the create tables all ended, and now I'm into inserts. Navigation properties. Okay, so I'm not sure what this navigation property table is, but this is basically saying insert some data into this table, and it's listing which columns to insert into, and then which values to put into those columns. So each insert is going to create one row. But that's the end of my file. So unfortunately, I don't exactly know how this XML data is put into the database. And I actually don't even know if this database is used by the game or not. But let's see what we can figure out. So first of all, at the very top, I noticed this little command, pragma schema version. I'm kind of curious which type of database this is using. Let's just copy this and Google it and see what comes up. Okay, so the first thing that came up is SQLite. So I'm going to assume that's probably the database they're using. The reason I wanted to know that is there are lots of different versions of SQL. They're all extremely similar, but they have slight differences. So knowing which database engine I'm using is going to help me. And SQLite makes sense because that's a small database that's usually embedded inside of a program, whereas other types of databases like SQL Server are generally run on a server somewhere and not necessarily inside of an app. So I want to see if I modify this SQL file, what might happen. And maybe the first thing I can do is databases have a concept called a trigger. And basically they are like an event that occurs anytime a specific action happens. So since I know that there's a table called technologies, then I'm going to create a trigger based on that. So I'll say after insert on technologies, and then I need a semicolon whenever I end a command. So inside of the trigger, I don't need this tab, but it will just help make it easier to read. So what this is saying is anytime the technology table gets a record inserted, then I'm going to execute this trigger. And this is just a made up name. It needs to be unique, but I can use any name that I want. So usually you want to make it something descriptive that kind of matches what the trigger's doing. So I think I want to just run an update statement on the technologies table. And let me see what columns are in the technologies table. Okay, so here's the table with its list of columns. I basically want to test if I change something in this SQL file, if it'll actually make an effect on the game, the same way that by modifying the XML, I made an effect on the game. So ideally, I want to change something that's visible on the screen so that I know if it actually had an effect. So this description here, that might be useful. I could put some actual text. Okay, so I'm going to say update technology set description equals, and I'll just say the word test, I think, where, what was the name of the columns again? Technology type, where technology type equals tech underscore pottery, semicolon. Normally for databases, it's not case sensitive. I'm not positive if SQLite is, so I'll just, to be safe, make it all uppercase because that's how it was in the XML. Languages like JavaScript or C++ are case sensitive when you compare strings. So just be safe. And also this was a little odd in SQL, a single equal sign is a comparison. In other languages like C++, it's a double equal sign as a comparison. So I'm saying take the technologies table, search for anywhere that this technology type column is pottery, and update it and modify the description column of that row to be test. And because I know technology type is the primary unique key, then this should only update the one matching row. But in theory, if I did not have a where clause in here, like if I just said update set description, it would actually update the entire table and modify every row to have that value. So you do want to be careful with your where clause to make sure it's filtering for the correct rows. I just remembered some databases prefer single quotes instead of double quotes. I'm not super familiar with SQLite. I usually use SQL Server. And the reason I use double quotes is because they're being used here. But those are for column names, which is different than strings. So I wonder if I should have used single quotes here. I forgot to use the word begin right here. So when you, at the end of the create trigger statement, you need to wrap your code in a begin end. Okay, started a new game. Okay, perfect. That is really exciting. So the word test showed up when I moused over pottery. So that means if I modify something inside of the SQL, it affects the game. So let's think about the end goal here. When I modified the XML, I had to change the prerequisites and the technologies. And I can do that in a trigger, but there's a few caveats. I don't want to randomize the data until it's completely inserted. And with SQLite, you can do a bulk insert into a table. And in this case, like with navigation properties, they're doing one row at a time. I don't know if the real code for technologies is inserting one row at a time. But for SQLite with a trigger, it only will trigger on one row at a time. So if they insert 100 rows in bulk, I'll get 100 different trigger executions. So the issue with that is if I randomize during the first execution of the trigger, I'll only have one technology available. So that's not really going to randomize anything. I need to wait until all, I don't know how many technologies there are, but all 100 are inserted and then randomize afterwards. And also, because I have to randomize the prerequisites and the technologies, I really need to wait until they're both sets are inserted. And I don't know, does the code insert all the technologies one at a time and then afterwards insert all the prerequisites one at a time? Or does it do like one technology and then one prerequisite? I'm going to assume it probably does all the technologies first and then all the prerequisites second, because since there's relationships between like these keys have to be looked up in the technologies table as that's the relationship, there would be an exception in the database if the relationship couldn't be navigated because the key didn't exist in the primary table. So I'm going to guess they probably insert all the technologies first and then afterwards the prerequisites, but I should verify that. And the second thing I should verify is this trigger is for an insert. There's other things you can trigger on. I probably should verify whether or not there's any rows that are updated or deleted. It probably doesn't matter, but just to be safe, I'll check for it, because if that is happening, if, for example, if I randomize things and then afterwards the values get modified, then it could unrandomize my data. And I wonder if I want to wait till after prerequisites and technologies are done, I wonder what table comes after, like quotes. So I should look at if there's a table for this as well, and then check the order that the rows are inserted. So let's see, search for tech quotes. Okay, there is a table. So I know all those 3 rows exist. So let's do something here to just kind of figure out what order things are happening. So I'm going to do a trigger on technology prereqs. Okay, so that's the name of this table. So I want to check for inserts on that. And I'll just put the table name into the description. Since that's going to show up in the UI on the game, then I can give myself a note basically telling me if the code was executed or not. So I'll also do it on quotes. And these names need to be unique. They don't have to match the actual table name. So I'll just give them a random value just so it doesn't crash. So I'm always updating the technology table based on these different triggers. And then I also want to look for updates as well. So I'll copy that whole section and paste it, change these to update, and then put an update in the text here. Since I don't have a where clause on here, they're going to overwrite each other based on which one happens like first or last. So for example, if this one changes everything to technologies and then immediately afterwards everything gets changed to prerequisites, then I won't actually know if this first trigger was happening or not. So I'm going to put a where clause on here and only do it for specific technology names. So this one I'll do if it's pottery, and pottery, animal husbandry, mining, sailing, astrology, and irrigation. So I'm going to restart the game. The idea here is I want each trigger to be completely isolated to a specific technology, so I know for each individual trigger whether or not it's actually executing, because I need to know how the code inserts the records into the database so that I can be smart about how I randomize and modify the data. Start a new game, hope tree. Okay, so pottery says technologies, husbandry says technology prereqs, mining says technology quotes. These descriptions look like the default. These don't have any weird words that I added. Let me double check. So that would be, so these first 3 triggers all executed. These last 3, the updates, none of them did. So sailing, astrology, irrigation, these are all. So that's good news. So the data is never modified. So I don't even need to worry about that. And all 3 of these triggers are happening. So what I need to know is which order these are happening in, whether it's in bulk, all technologies, and then afterwards all prereqs and afterwards all quotes, or whether or not they're all mixed up and happening in random orders. So I think a way I could do that is I could add on to my where clause. So I'm going to assume that technology quotes happens at the very end. So if I say only modify the pottery if there exists at least one row inside of quotes, then that would tell me whether or not every single one of the technologies is inserted before quotes start getting inserted, or whether or not they're happening out of order. And actually, I'm going to take off pottery because I just want to know if any technology row is inserted after quotes start getting inserted. So I think I actually just don't want this trigger to run at all. And I can actually run both of these. So I want to see if anything ever says technologies or technology prereqs. But the ideal would be everything just says its default description. Start a new game, look at the tech tree. Okay, all the descriptions look normal. So I'm pretty confident. It's possible I made a mistake in my logic, but none of this code actually matters. This was just testing to make sure I understand how the data is getting inserted. So my theory that I'm 90% confident in is that all technologies are inserted, and then all the prerequisites are inserted afterwards, and then afterwards all the quotes. Because that would make sense. If I were to code it, that's how I would code it. And I haven't seen any evidence otherwise. So what that means is I probably want my code inside of the technology quote trigger, because if I put my code inside of either one of these triggers, it would be hard for me to know if it's all the way completed inserting every single technology and every single prerequisite. And I don't want to randomize before all the data is there. But if I do it on the technology quote, then I know all the data is there. So I don't think I need these triggers at all. I do want this trigger. So let me give it a better name. And instead of after insert, I think I actually want before insert. So the very first time this gets executed, this table should be completely empty. Whereas if I did after insert, there would be one row the first time it gets executed. And then I just want to randomize the data one time and then leave it alone. So I'm only going to execute the code if the quote table is still empty, because that means it's the first time the trigger got executed. Another way I could do it is at the end of the trigger, I could have the trigger disable itself. Either way would work, but I'll just do it this way. So I'll say where not exists, select star from quotes. So it'll only update the description to this value. It's the first time this trigger is executing. And while I'm at it, I think I want some extra debug data in here that might be useful for later. I want to find out what version of SQLite is being used, because that will affect what type of commands I can execute. Because if they have a really old version, there might be some newer commands that I'm not allowed to use. And the randomized code is going to be complicated, so I need to know what features are available to me. Okay, when I mouse over, it says 3.13.0. So let me download SQLite 3.13.0. I couldn't find the exact version of SQLite Studio that I needed, but this is the closest I could find. So the Studio version is 3.06, but that's just the user interface version. The SQLite is the actual engine, database engine that runs behind the scenes, and it is version 3.8.10, which is pretty close because I need 3.13.0, so it's about 5 versions off from 8 to 13. There might be some new features that were added, but it's unlikely they removed any features. So if I code something, some test code that works to randomize the data in here, it should also work in Civilization. So I'll use this for testing. Just because the random code I'm going to write is going to be complicated, and it's a pain to open and close the game every time I make a minor change. So I want to code it in here first, be confident that it's correct before I paste it into the game. So let's copy just the data I need. So I know I need to be able to work with the technology table. So I'm going to copy this across to SQLite, and I can execute it now and then refresh my tables on the left. So I shouldn't need to keep this around. I'll just comment it out, because unless I drop the table, it should stay there. I may want to be able to truncate. Truncate deletes all the data out of a table. So I'm just commenting this out, but in the future, I'm guessing every time I do a test, I'm going to want to clear out the data for my next test. So I'm also going to need the prerequisite, which is right here. And I think if I highlight and execute, it should run just that, what I have highlighted. Yep, truncate table, technology prereqs. I need semicolons on those. And then I don't think I actually need the quote table, because even though I'm executing this code inside of a trigger, I'm only doing that because that's a way to inject it into the game when the event happens in the game that the data is ready. But in SQLite Studio, I can execute the code whenever I want. I don't need to wait for the game to cause it to happen because I'm just doing a test here. So I'll just insert directly into these with some fake data for testing. And because I'm just testing, I also don't need all of these columns probably. So, okay, I'm going to change era because I did that in my testing with XML before. I wasn't changing these before. The advisor, I think I will change UI tree row. In critical, I don't know if I need those, but I don't think I do. Because all of this data, I want it to stay the same. I do want to keep cost. So I'm basically just switching the cost and the era so that its location on the tech tree changes, but the actual name stays the same. I want both those columns because I'll be modifying them both. I don't think I care about the relationships. Okay, and then I want to insert some fake data here. Testing, list off my column names. And pasting, but I guess it's just as easy to retype it. Okay, and I think a good test would maybe be 3 random technologies. So let's do 3 animal husbandry and mining. They might be better if they're from different eras, different values. Okay, so if these 3 can randomize correctly, once I have my code written, then I'll assume everything else can random. So cost on these, pottery, I think was 25. Yep. Celestial navigation is 120. Military tactics is 300. And then the era, celestial navigation is classical. Military tactics is medieval. And then the tree row. So this one's a -2. Just for fun, I'm going to pretend that celestial navigation is 1. And then I already remember that pottery was 0. Yeah. Because I don't want to have 2 of them that are -2, because then I won't know if it actually swapped correctly. Because if it randomly swaps celestial and military, it's going to be swapping -2 with -2. So I won't actually know if it swapped. Okay, so I'm inserting 3 records into the technologies table. These are the list of columns. These are the list of values. And the prerequisites, I want to do basically the same way. Didn't create the writing row in the technology table. That's fine. It won't hurt anything because I deleted the foreign keys. So it's not going to throw an exception that because writing doesn't exist. The pottery probably has multiple relationships, but I'm just going to assume if I get it working with one, it probably will work with more. And if I find a bug after I get it running in the game, then I'll research it more. But just for ease of testing, if I only have a couple of values, it'll be easier to visualize if I've coded correctly. Celestial navigation has sailing. I guess there is something I need to think about, which is the technology could be on either side of the prerequisite. It could be the primary or it could be the dependent. I probably want an example of both. Pottery is only on the right side. Celestial is only on the left side. So I guess that's fine. That gives me an example of each. Military, maybe you don't even need. I already have an example of each, but just in case. There's military tactics. Okay, so I have my example data. So let me run this just to make sure it inserts correctly. So now I've got to think about, this is just my setup code for how I'm going to test. But now I've got to think about how I'm actually going to code this. So something I think could come in handy. Every table has a column called row ID, which basically is just an incrementing number for which order the rows come in. So what I could do, I think, is take the technology table, sort it in a random order, and insert it into a second table, because if it's in random order, then I could match up like the number 1, which is pottery in the original table. If it's in random order in the second table, then number 1 might be military tactics. So if I match up the number 1s to each other, it would show me that pottery and military tactics are connected. And the idea is I'm wanting to swap 2 technologies with each other, so that will create a randomized tech tree. Because if every single technology gets swapped with one other random technology, that should create basically a completely randomized tech tree. So let's try that. I'm going to create a table that will be almost identical to the original technologies, but I'll call it randomized technologies. And I don't think I need actual values here like cost. I just need the name of technology type. And then I'll insert to randomized. Column name I'm going to insert into is technology type. Before, when I inserted it, I used this values command. That will only insert 1 row. Instead, I want to insert entire data set, like a bulk insert. And I'm going to get that data set by selecting, which is like reading all the data out of a different table. So I'm going to select from original technologies table. And I have to list what columns I want. So if I did an asterisk here, it would mean read every single column. But I'm only care about the technology name. I'm not going to randomize the cost. I'm just going to swap the cost with whichever matching technology whatever technology gets matched up with. So if I just run this, it will keep all the technologies in the same order, but I want them in random order. I don't need to specify this row ID column. That will be automatic. SQLite always creates a row ID column even if you don't tell it to, and that's always the order that the records were created in when they were first inserted into the database. So there's a function called random. If I order by that, it works. So I'll create the table, the records, then I'll test querying the data. Okay, so before it was pottery first, then celestial navigation, then military tactics, and now that's basically the exact opposite order. But it definitely randomized it. So next, I want to match up the values I'm going to swap out. So I'm going to call this table swapped technologies. And I'm going to need the technology name twice. Okay, so I've got my name twice, and I'll call one original, the other swapped. And put a primary key on here, so that if I accidentally put it so that the same combination is used twice, it gives me an error. I think I'll also make each one unique so that pottery can't be original twice and it can't be swapped twice. Okay, so let me create that table and then let me figure out how I'm going to insert into that table. Swapped technologies. You don't have to have quotes around a table name or a column name. In some cases I've done it and sometimes I haven't. It works either way. Okay, so I'm going to need to select from both the original technology and the randomized technology, I think. Select from technologies, join randomized technology. So after you say a table name, you can give it an alias. So you can say the word as, and then a lot of times you just use the first letter of the table name. So technologies as T, but you don't have to have the word as. So a lot of times I'll just do space T. It's just nice to have a shortened alias so that when it's like a variable name, and every time I reference this table, it's nice to just use one letter instead of retyping the full name. I use a join. I need to say which columns between these two tables I'm going to use in this relationship to match up the records. Let's do it on the row ID like I mentioned earlier. Actually, if I were to run randomize, I've got these rows 1, 2, 3. If I do the same thing on technologies, I've got rows 1, 2, 3. But for technologies, it's pottery is number 1. And for randomized, military tactics is number 1. So I'm saying match up where these two tables have the same value. So match up the two number ones, then match up the two number twos, and match up the two number threes. So what that's going to do is create, I'll just for now do a select star when I join these so you can see the results. It's going to create a combination. So all of the rows from the technology table are on the left, or all the columns from the technology table are on the left. And then from the randomized technology, it's on the right. So you can see celestial navigation is matched up with pottery. And it doesn't show the row ID column because I didn't tell it to include that, but it's fine. So when I insert into the swapped technologies, say t.technology type, from this first table, the technology type is going to get put into original, comma, r.technology type. So from the randomized, the technology type is going to go into swapped. And here it says technology type :1. That's just saying that this technology type column name is duplicated because both tables have that column name. So the :1 is just saying it's a different column, but it has the same name. So it's just keeping them separated. So that's why I need to put this alias in front, r dot and t dot. Because if I just said technology type, I wouldn't know which of the two tables to grab that value from. Okay, let me run this. And let me explain the join actually. So this is a shortcut for the word inner join. And what that means is both tables have to have the value, a matching value for the row to keep the row in the final result. And if I take off the word inner, it still means inner join. The other options are left outer or right outer. I can also take out the word outer. If I just say right join, it means the same thing as right outer. And if I say left join, it means the same thing as left outer. And then I can also do a full join. So, or a full outer, but the outer isn't required. So let me explain what those means. Well, let me start with the left join. If the left table has the number 1 and the right table does not have the number 1, then with a left outer join, it would still keep a row, but on the right side, it would just have the null value, meaning a missing value. But if it was the opposite, if it was a left join and the right table had a number 1 and the left table did not have a number 1, it would just exclude the row altogether. And a right join would basically just be the opposite of that. And then full join would be a combination. So if the left side had a number 1 and the right side didn't, it would keep it. And if the right side had a number 2 and the left side didn't, it would also keep that. So it's a combination of both the left and the right outer joins. But by doing an inner join or just a join, I'm saying I need value to exist on both sides of the table in order to keep it in the final result. So run this insert and let me select swapped technologies table. See, celestial navigation got matched up with pottery, matched up with military tactics. Military tactics got matched up with celestial navigation. Let me just add, I'm not going to execute this yet, but just in case I need it for testing later, I still have to drop the table and recreate it. Code is all test code, but this code at the bottom is stuff I'm going to keep in my final code. So I want to keep the two sections separated. So now the swapped technologies, I need to update the values in the technology table the same way I did before, where I keep the name pottery the same, but it needs the values from celestial navigation. So it needs to grab the 120 classical 1 and put them in here. And then the opposite, it needs to take from pottery the 25 ancient 0 and put them in military tactics. One thing that's a little tricky about this is, let's say I have a variable called pottery and it equals 25. I have a variable celestial navigation which equals 120. I want to copy the value from celestial pottery. Afterwards, I want to copy pottery into military tactics. work because, so the value 25 is put into pottery, right? And the value 120 is put into celestial. Celestial is getting copied into pottery, so pottery is now 120, but the original value of 25 has been lost. So when I try to copy pottery into tactics, instead of getting the original 25 copied into tactics, it's going to get the number 120. So both pottery and tactics will be 120. The way you typically do something like this is you first put pottery, since it's the first thing that you're overriding, you put its original value into like a swap variable. So swap equals pottery, and then when you copy it into tactics, you could use swap instead of pottery. So that way tactics gets the original 25. So I guess another way to do that would be to call it backup pottery. We're going to back up pottery value so that even though it's been modified by celestial, we can still put it into tactics. So in a database, it's going to be the same thing. When I run an update, they're going to be overriding each other. And so I kind of need to make a backup first. So in order to make a backup, first want to create a backup table, which will basically be identical to this technologies table. But remember, I deleted a bunch of columns here that I didn't need for testing. I also don't need to back up the entire table. I just need to back up the columns that I'm going to override. So backup technologies, there's a shortcut. So I could create the table like this, and then afterwards say insert into backup technologies, select star from technologies, would work. But I actually don't even need to do the create at all. Instead, I can say create table backup technologies as select star from technology, and it will essentially automatically figure out what columns are in this technologies table and put them into this table. So, but if I'm going to do that, in this test code, I only have a few columns, but in the real code, I have a bunch of columns, and I don't really want to back up everything. So it probably wouldn't hurt, but I'll just back up the values I care about. So I want, let's see, technology type, cost, era type, UI tree row. Should work. And then I'll add a drop up here just for testing in case I need to. I have a backup now. So the columns I'm modifying are cost, era type, and UI tree row. So I'm going to write what's called a subquery. So in parentheses, I'm going to write a completely separate query that finds what value to put into the cost. So the subquery is like this original table technologies. It's going to look it up in the swapped technologies and look it up in the backup technologies. And swapped will be to find which technology is being swapped with, and the backup will be used to find what cost value. B.cost, because I'll use B as backup, my alias. And then I'm going to join this backup technologies to swapped technologies, alias of S. This is going to be a little bit tricky. So the update command is going to, if I don't have a where clause in here, update every single row in the entire table. And so think of it like a big loop going one row at a time. And each row, when it decides what cost value to do, it's going to run this query to find out the value. So I can use this technology name as filter inside of this query. I know which cost to look up. So on the swapped technologies, I'm going to say the original is from technologies.technology type. So here I have the data for my original and swapped. So technologies, it's going to loop over the whole table. And if we remember, the first value that I inserted originally was pottery. So that's the first value it's going to try to update, is this row. So it's going to look for anything in the swapped table that says pottery as original. I have the swap table shown here, and the original pottery is the third row. It's going to look up this pottery value and filter to this row. And then the cost that I want to return comes from backup. So far, when I've joined, I have not said what to filter for on backup technologies. So right now, it's returning 3 different costs, one for each value of backup. So I want it to filter for the military tactics value for the backup, so that when it updates pottery, I want it to put in the cost from military tactics. So I need to say and s.swapped and b.technology type. So I'm saying from swapped technologies, filter for pottery, because that's the first row in technologies. And then because that row has military tactics, and take backup technology and look for military tactics. So there'll only be one row for backup technologies, one row for swap technologies. And because we joined them, it'll be one long record that has all the values from the one row of backup technologies next to all the columns for the one row of swap technologies. And I'm just returning the cost from the backup, which is the military tactics cost. Modifying the technologies table, and we discuss how it's a loop, and the first value that's being modified was pottery because it's the first row in the table. That's what we did all our filters for. Then it's going to modify the pottery row and give it the cost of the military tactics row. I'm going to copy this exact same for error type. The only thing I'm going to change is just which column is being read out of the backup to assigned. Same thing for UI tree row. That should be everything I need to swap the technology table. And I'm going to next want to do this, a similar thing for the prerequisites. But for now, let's just execute it and see what happens. So first, let's check what's supposed to be swapped. Let's just screenshot this. So I'm going to hit print screen on my keyboard and paste it into a Paint program so I can remember what these were for later. Run this update. So I should see that all the data is swapped around. My screenshot, pottery was supposed to get swapped with military tactics. Tactics has 300 medieval -2. So that swapped exactly how it was supposed to. Next, randomize the prerequisites. Because if you remember, when I was looking at the XML file and I was changing the prerequisites, and I was swapping pottery with currency, I think. So I deleted all the, currencies. And I just remembered that an empty string was a placeholder for pottery. And then afterwards, I went to all the potteries and I did currency. That's necessary for the exact same reason that that backup variable is necessary. Because if I don't delete the currencies first, but instead changing all the potteries to currency, and when I get down to this currency here, I'm not gonna know, was this a pottery that got changed to currency, or was this an original currency that should have been left alone? Because potteries are changing to currencies, but the currencies are changing to horseback riding. And so I need to know, was this an original currency or was it a pottery that already got changed to currency? So I'm going to need backup type mechanism. The way I did it before was I just cleared out the currencies and left it an empty string. The problem with that is when you do an update statement, like I did here, I don't have any where clause. I'm not filtering for a specific type of data or like a specific row. So I'm updating the entire table all at once in bulk. So what would happen is if I followed that mechanism where I just cleared out, all the currencies, well, the same thing would happen with shipbuilding and navigation, and astrology all at the same time. So everything would get emptied out. And so I would have the same issue. I wouldn't know what value is this supposed to be. So instead, I think I'll just do something like add a space to it. So maybe I take all the currencies and add a space. And then when I change all the potteries to currency, I won't add the space. And that way I'll know the currencies that have a space were original, and the currencies that don't have a space are the new ones. Okay, let me think of how I want to code this prerequisite randomization or swapping. So first, I want to update the prerequisite table. So update that table with a set. I'm not going to have a where clause because just like before, I'm going to loop over every single row and update all of them. But I want to change both of the columns just like before, and I'll have a subquery that decides what value it's going to put in. And I'm not going to worry about the second column yet because once I have the technology one written, I'll just copy and paste it and modify it. So I'm modifying the technology. So I just want to use the swapped technology. So s.technology from swapped technologies. So I'm going to alias it with s so that it's easier. I don't have to retype the whole table name. And I don't need to do a join because it's already looping over every row of technology prereqs. So I'll just say where s.swapped equals technology prereqs dot technology. So basically the technology column in the prerequisites, I'm searching for that technology value in the swapped table. And I'm figuring out which original value, oh, this should be original, not technology. I'm finding which original value it was swapped from. So I'm going to look in prerequisites for anything where the technology is pottery, and then I will find the swap technology and get the original value, which is celestial, and I'll return that. So I'm going to change any prerequisite that says pottery will instead get changed to be celestial navigation. Hopefully that makes sense. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing here with the prerequisite tech. So instead of looking for a technology, so in the main table of technology prereqs, I guess I should query this table real quick so you can see what it looks like. So if pottery is the value in the prerequisite tech, I'm going, so that as it's looping through, if it's on the row for that has pottery, it's going to look up in the swapped technologies what it was swapped with. So then if I look at swap technologies, pottery was swapped with celestial navigation. So then it's going to grab that as the original and put it into the prerequisite tech. That seems like it should work. But then I mentioned the issue where I need to put a space in there. So if I put a space, most SQL languages, if you want to take two text values and combine them together. So here I have a text value of a space, and here I have the text value that came from this column. In most SQL languages, you use a plus sign and it's called concatenation when you add two words together. In the case of SQLite, for some reason, they use this double pipe symbol, and that means the word or in most languages, but for some reason in SQLite, this is concatenate. I feel like it's a little bit awkward, but I think this should be correct. Let me run it and see what happens. Okay, so I got an error about the not null constraint. So right here, where was it? Technology prereqs, I said that technology cannot have the value of null. So for example, it's going through every row of prerequisite, and it's going to modify this technology with its swapped value. So it's going to be looking for what writing got swapped with. So it's going to be looping through every row in prerequisites, modifying the prerequisite column, and it's going to run this subquery, and it's going to say what is a swapped value of writing. Well, I don't have a swapped value for writing because writing was not in my original list of technologies. So I don't think that null error will happen in the real game, but just in case, I need to fix it for my debugging code anyways, and it shouldn't hurt anything in the real game. But what I can do is just say, wrap this with an if null. I'll do it on both of these. So that function, it will run the first section of code, and then you put a comma and a parenthesis. And if the value that came out of that first section was null, you can swap it with a different value. So I'll just tell it to keep the original value that it had. I have my parentheses wrong because I should have put the if null outside of this. Let me move those. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So the query is returning a single value, and if it's null, then it'll get swapped out with this alternate value. Okay, I'm gonna run this update statement and test to see if it works. But I don't need to make a backup of the original values because I can see right here what the original values should have been. And I still have the backup of what things were swapped in my paint. So I'll do the update. Oh, and then I put spaces on here. After I'm done, I want to remove the spaces. So I'll just, so the trim command takes away spaces on the start or ending of a string. This will fix the extra space that I added. And that was necessary because it kind of depends on the specific database engine, but SQLite, since it kind of updates one row at a time, then that's the issue where if I didn't add the space, the next row when it tries to execute, it could get confused on if it was a value that was already modified or not. Okay, so I'm going to remove the spaces, and then let me just look at the new technology prereqs and see if they were swapped how we expect. So originally, writing was matched up with pottery, and we wouldn't expect writing to get modified because we don't have that in our swap table at all. Our swap table has pottery, navigation, and tactics. So writing stayed in the same spot, but pottery got swapped with navigation. So if we look in how it should have got swapped, it says navigation and pottery are matched up. So that looks good. And then the next one, it shows military tactics and sailing. So navigation was matched up with sailing. So let's see what navigation was swapped with. So navigation and military tactics. So here we see military tactics and sailing. And then the last one, we had military tactics and mathematics. Mathematics, so both in the case of sailing, mathematics, and writing, they all stayed the same because they were values that are not in our swap table because they were not in our original. So that's just kind of bad data for testing. In the real game, that shouldn't be an issue. But in this case, the military tactics, which was the one on the left, it got swapped with pottery. So let's just make sure. Yep, so pottery and military tactics are right there. So it looks like it's working. And I don't visually see a space on the front, so that should be fine. I feel like that is all the code I need to run this. So let's copy it into the actual game and see what happens. So I don't need the test data at the top. So where I created the fake tables and the inserts, the game's already doing that for me, but all my other code I need. So I'm going to copy it, Control C, and then come into my SQL and paste it. Now I need to think about how I want to run this, because when we were testing in SQLite Studio, we could just execute any query when we wanted. But in this case, we have to use a trigger to activate our code. So first of all, the tables that I'm creating can be above the trigger so that they get created like before any records get inserted, I want those tables to get created. So because I'll get an exception if I try to use these tables and they don't exist yet. And then we already decided that this technology quote trigger would be a good place to write all of our code. And we had this where clause and this before insert to say basically only run this update statement one time, because the first time the trigger executes, since it's a before insert, there will be no rows. And it's checking to see if there's an existing row in this table. And so because it'll only execute if there are no rows yet. So it's only on the first time the trigger gets executed. So I want to keep the same where clause for all of my code I wrote below, so that all of the randomized code only happens one time. But this update statement, this was just for testing. I was trying to figure out the SQLite version. So I don't need this update. I just need the where. But this where, I'll need to append it to the right queries. So let's copy all of this code inside my trigger. And I want to tab it in so that it looks like it's visually inside the trigger. And I am going to paste this where clause on the bottom of all the queries, so they each only execute one time. They'll only execute the very first time that the trigger executes. But this create table is actually a little tricky. I don't know what will happen if I put this where clause here. I think the first time the trigger executes, it will try to create the table with all the data that comes from the technologies table. The second time, because of the where clause, when it runs the select, the where clause will filter it to have 0 results. But I think it will still try to create the table, even though it will have 0 results in it. But the problem is the table will have already existed. So it will crash the second time the trigger executes, because it'll try to create a table that already exists. I think. I'm not positive, but just to be safe, I'm going to move this create table out here. If it runs before the trigger executes, then the technology table is going to be empty. So it's going to create this backup table, but it's going to create it with no values. So the first time the trigger runs, I'm just going to insert the values that I need. I can copy the column names. Okay, so it's basically the same as before. It's just a 2-step process now instead of 1. So when I added this where not exists, I pasted it to the wrong spot. So an order by has to come at the very end of the query after the where, and I accidentally put it before. Start the game, open the tech tree. Okay, this looks amazing. So instantly we can tell it's all randomized because pottery is not on the front anymore. And the arrows all look good. We don't have that bug that we had the first time we modified pottery, where the line got drawn over pottery because it had its prerequisite set up wrong. So it's looking good. Let's try to actually play the game for just a second and make sure it doesn't crash, that I can actually research these things. So if I research satellites, it should allow me to get tanks. So right now, I don't even have a city. Let me make a city. And then if I choose which unit I want to build, I can't build a tank. And normally, it's far into the game that you can get a tank, because you've got to start from the ancient era first. You're not going to jump all the way to the future era. But I'll try satellites. So it has this number 1, and that tells it kind of which order it's going to research technologies in. So if I scroll to the right and I pick something random, you can see that the prerequisites are working correctly, because I picked construction and it shows it as a 3, and the arrows come backwards, and it knows that it needs to research these other things first. So the prerequisites are working correctly. But anyways, let me just start with just satellites, and then I'll just start skipping my turn. It's going to force me to build something and force me to move my characters around. Skip the turn, skip the turn. I don't know how many, it looks like it would take about 4 turns before satellites will be done. So I'll just keep moving my units around. until 4 turns are up. Okay, so it says satellites is done. Perfect. Then I want to go to my town, and I want to, well, first of all, it lets me choose a new research. So let's open up the tech tree. Satellites is obviously completed, you can tell, and so now I could start working on engineering or guidance systems. So the tech tree seems to be working great, but more importantly, let me pick my city. You can see right here the tank is available. I'll switch to tank, and you can see the tank showed up here. So tech tree's working great, even though it's randomized. So I think the code's working. The only thing I did not randomize was the civics tree. So let's see if we can't do this just really quickly using the existing code we wrote. So I'll quit out of the game, and this is gonna be cool and easy. I'm just going to select all of the code I wrote. I'm going to open up Notepad, paste it all in, and I'm just going to look for the word technologies and change it with civics. And then the word technology type, change it with civic type. Well, let me double check the column names in the table. So create table civics. Okay, yes, it is civic type. Civic type, replace all. Let me make sure the table name, civic quote. Yep, civic quotes. Let me make sure the term technology is not in here anywhere. Okay, technology prereqs. So that's probably going to be civic prereq. Yep, civic prereq. And search for the word technology anywhere else. So this is either civic or civic type. Let's see. Just, okay, civic and prereq civic. Oh, so instead of prereq tech, it should be prereq civic. And then the last one, technology. And that was going to be civic type, I believe. I believe that's everything. Let me just search for the word tech. Okay, I didn't miss any. So now that I've done that big find and replace, I'll just paste it all here at the end. The civic prereqs table, I think I did a find and replace for the wrong column name on accident. So inside of civic prereqs, there are 2 columns, prereq civic and civic. So in my code, let me look for anywhere that table is used. So I said civic type, it should just be civic. And same thing here, same thing here. The prereq civic looks correct. I think it was just the civic type, and then same thing on here, civic type, civic type. Okay, save that and restart the game. Game started, open the tech tree. Okay, this looks perfect. So it's completely randomized as before. So the first thing that should show up is code of laws. And yeah, these are completely random order. So working great. That's it. Thanks for watching. Drop a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you want to see other content like this. And most importantly, I need ideas for other games to hack. So please, in the comments below, tell me what game you've been playing and what hack you think would be interesting for that game.